I'm really curious, how do you do the attribution for auto homes? I've done a lot of them before. It's definitely a very challenging part. So do you have some secret sauce to share?
People didn't get their orders on Thanksgiving.
Wow.
They're like, what do I do now? No restaurants are open. Tons of guests coming over and I have nothing to feed them. It was a PR nightmare.
It's a very geo-centric expansion that's very unique in terms of growth marketing. Sipra, what are the biggest challenges in doing so? Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm Frost.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Jun. Today we have another guest, Sipra. Sipra and I worked together a long time ago at Twitter, and then she moved on to have a career journey in a different industry. Sipra, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and say hi to our audience?
Hi, I'm excited to be here. I'm Sipra. Excited to be catching back up with Jun. We worked together many years ago at Twitter, kind of been leading performance marketing, growth marketing over the years, spent a lot of time in grocery delivery, worked for Good Eggs, kind of local California brand, kind of cult favorites, local groceries, sustainable. It was a cool ride, kind of led performance marketing there. I also spent some time working in grocery delivery for a startup called Jupiter, where we kind of drove influencer-based recipe content, groceries, so you can shop recipes and groceries directly from influencers. But excited to be here and chat to you about grocery delivery and grocery marketing. Yeah.
I've certainly heard of Good Eggs. I'm not a user myself. It's probably a little bit above my price point. Can you talk a little bit about what is Good Eggs and what do you guys do?
Yeah, Good Eggs in a nutshell was sort of premium grocery delivery with meal kits and all your local favorites. So in San Francisco, for example, you could order groceries from Dosa, which is a popular Indian restaurant. You could order their simmer sauces, and then you could pair them with our meal kits and kind of get your full grocery delivery, but combined with local ingredients. The premise was that almost everything minus bananas were pretty much available within 200.
Minus bananas.
Minus bananas. Those are not available year round in California. So
wow.
But almost everything else came within, the idea was it came within 200 miles. So local, sustainable, ethical, and people really loved that in San Francisco, and buying their favorite brands and cult favorites, and kind of their neighborhood restaurants was able to sell their groceries online and get them delivered. So that was the general model.
That's a competitive space, right? And must be very capital intensive. You have to do all those kits and then run those warehouses and stuff.
Definitely. We had a very large warehouse in Bayview in San Francisco. And then as we grew, expanded to another one in Oakland. Very logistically intensive, especially with all the local vendors and all the local logistics. So that was definitely a challenge, and definitely some hiccups involved with kind of inventory and inventory availability, especially as you scale. Your marketing is doing really well, but then you can't keep up with the demand of the inventory of the products that you're selling. So you kind of have to shut off your ads or shut off your marketing, or kind of play that game with how much can we market while still maintaining the local inventory.
Yeah, so that sounds like it's a very geo-centric expansion that's very unique in terms of growth marketing. Sipra, what are the biggest challenges in doing so in your mind?
Definitely. It was very zip code based, which was very unique and kind of a new experience for me at that time. So it limits the channels that you're able to test with, but it's also really cool in terms of the campaigns and messaging that you can use. So we would run billboard ads and bus stop ads at specific locations in San Francisco, right next to the restaurant or even the grocery store. Why buy from Whole Foods when you can get your local vendor groceries right here? But then other kind of limited in terms of the channels we were able to use were Facebook, Google in terms of digital, because those allow you to hyper target, but then it just limits your scalability. And then radio, another local kind of where you can sort of address that local audience, as well as, like I said, hyper targeted billboards and bus stop ads were sort of also kind of ways we did brand awareness. But yeah, it definitely presented some unique challenges in terms of marketing, attribution, scalability, all of that. But
Wow,
I'm
radio.
curious. Yeah, I'm really curious. How do you do the attribution for out of homes? I've done a lot of them before. It's definitely a very challenging part. So do you have some secret sauce to share?
An interesting thing that we did during that time is sort of run ads only in certain zip codes and then not do it in other zip codes and try to get, hyper targeted analysis in terms of when we ran radio and had brand campaigns and in these areas and we didn't have it in these, did we see a lift? Those are some sort of studies that we did. And then, it's tough though for attribution.
So I'm curious, especially when you talk about those a little bit harder to measure in terms of attribution. Do you end up just not proceeding because it's hard to measure and attribute? Or is there some sort of general guidance on like you have to do radio if you're doing local, those sort of things?
I think it's a combination, and then really being able to tell those stories and having really good data teams behind you to help you kind of look at the analysis when you ran this in this area and you didn't. I think those help. We also tested kind of multi-touch attribution platforms like Rockerbox, and really a lot of, analysis and heavy use like with data teams, I guess, is and being able to tell the story is kind of it's a ongoing challenge across industries, across marketing, like the ever story of brand and being able to measure the lift with surveys, lift studies, on and off testing, all of these things. So yeah,
I have an interesting story to share actually, and I don't know if you have something similar, because we found out to do this kind of lifting is very difficult when we're at Wish. So what we found is we just had to saturate the entire city. So we actually bought all the bus stop, and in Stockholm they actually allow you to programmatically like purchase the stop, which is just like a video panel right there. So you can just buy it for the entire week, and you can see if people who are searching for you in that particular zip code goes up a lot.
Yes.
And also the QR code, like right at the bus stop. So I'm curious, have you tried something? Is it much better to attribute, or was it too expensive?
Well, that's definitely a better way to do it. I think at that time, I don't know, that wasn't an option at that time. So I think, that's definitely a better way of attribution, I think, for that particular type.
But even if you do that, I'm curious, like there is a multi-touch issue there, right? So it's probably going to be dominated by this particular one saturation experiment. I'm curious, either one of you, on how do we do the multi-touch if you have, I don't know, direct mail going on, you have a out of home going on, you have then Google and Facebook and others.
Right. And how do you isolate when you're running all of them at the same time? I think that's definitely a challenge. So I think, different ways I've seen or have done in the past is kind of like I was saying, sort of on and off, or isolating things to certain periods, or only doing things in certain regions or certain zip codes, and then doing the other in, running direct mail in these zip codes and running bus stop ads, or, or kind of like not running digital, not running everything together, so you can isolate a little bit of the impact, but it's hard. And then how long can you really do that without like hurting your performance? Because when I'm running all of them together, it's going to generally result in better performance. And then, when we were just like implementing Rockerbox, I think like assigning weights and just based on historicals or experience or kind of whatever we thought. So it's definitely a challenge.
That's the experience piece is what I'm curious about. Let's just say you go into, from Twitter and digital to this hyper local logistical warehouse oriented place as a default. Like, what's your thinking around like percentage allocation from different channels, or how much do you experiment to find out whether certain channel is working? Are you like doing the direct mail to people's home campaign versus buying ads on Facebook? And then also you seem to have ruled out some of the smaller platforms just because they're not big enough for hyperlocal zip code level targeting. Yes. But what's the threshold if there is one?
My general take or approach on that overall, in terms, especially when I'm like starting somewhere new and looking and building at marketing, how much should we allocate to this? I definitely take like a scale and learn and test approach. And we just kind of go and test everything with a smaller budget. And as soon as some signal is telling me that, that could be CPA, that could be CTR, that could be, it depends on the channel and what metric I'm looking at, but I'll sort of say like, if we hit this threshold, I'm going to scale this channel. And that's kind of the approach I've taken throughout the course of my career, like leading growth across industries, across spaces. I think that has worked really well. So as soon as the signal, you set your signals, test your hypotheses, and as soon as something is showing you signal, you just kind of go for it. I think I'm also, just having been in the startup world for a long time, you also don't want to wait too long for those signals. It's like, we're not going to wait like a month even. Sometimes that could be a week or even a few days. And I think that's definitely a learning like I've developed in the startup world, whereas it's kind of like at bigger companies, we might say we need to wait for statistical significance and we're like only at 85% and we can't increase, blah, blah, blah. Like none of that. I'm like, okay, I have 50%, and just over the years of building confidence and knowing how things work, I think that also helps. Like all of these signals are showing me that it makes sense to increase this channel and double down here. But yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm also curious when you mentioned earlier, this is a specific high-end offering, right? So how do you do this targeting and know how big the market is in every zip code? Because I think, I don't know, but I think like a nice box of berries and good eggs would be like $10 or something. Yeah.
Yes, definitely premium groceries. So we knew it's like high household income, certain demographics. We use a lot of like credit card data from credit card companies and other, I can't remember the data sources. There's specific companies that will provide you household income because you enter that in your when you're applying for a credit card. And so we use that data to layer on like zip code and see where's the highest concentration of this sort of demographic. And we use that to inform our targeting, plus like city and census data. There's a lot of data, local data that will tell you who's high household income. But in terms of like targeting and especially kind of the type of groceries that people were interested, like I was mentioning at the beginning, it's local, it's like cult favorites. So there was this campaign we ran with Harry's strawberries, if you're familiar. They're really, really good strawberries, but they're also $10.
Wow.
And it's like the strawberries that celebrities eat. And we sort of thought, let's run that. Let's like run that in the copy and the messaging. People are going to love this. And it didn't perform well because most people don't want to buy $10 strawberries. Maybe it's a novelty when you're at the farmer's market or you kind of come across it, but like online grocery, people are very sensitive to price. And even if you're like, oh, that sounds kind of good, I'm not going to add a $10 box of strawberries to my order.
Yeah. 1% is by definition only 1% of the population.
Exactly. So
I'm curious, since you've run those experiments already and decided to double down on, let's say, radio you mentioned and direct mail, what was the early success you've seen, or is it just necessity, like you have to do radio, you have to do direct mail for this sort of physical goods delivery kind of thing?
I think it definitely was. It had to be a mix because if you only ran like the Facebook and the digital ads without the brand awareness and the other local, channels like radio or out of home, then, we didn't see as much volume or like brand awareness. So we definitely had to do all of it. But once Good Eggs had this pretty strong brand awareness within that target demo, it doesn't take that long too when you're like, targeting a limited amount of people and a limited amount of zip codes to build brand awareness. So then that really like helped the digital channels skyrocket because you already had like pretty strong brand awareness in a very hyper local market. So I think that only helped in terms of conversion rates and CAC. But I think, like I mentioned, even of all the things that we tested, like ethical, sustainable, local, cult favorites, the thing that still performed the best was like a $25 off promo, because
Yeah.
people ultimately, at the end of the day, grocery is a commodity, and people are still, no matter your household income, it's still hard to like, justify your weekly grocery order, and weekly items that you need, like bananas and strawberries or whatever items that you typically buy. It's hard to justify consistently spending $10 on that box of strawberries. So
I'm actually curious for that, because when you say the promotions are the best way to make people buy more, like how do you design the cadence? Because you want to maintain the margin, right? So just curious about your strategy and how you decide that strategy there.
That's a good question. I mean, we never went over $25 off.
Sorry, I missed something. Is the $25 off on a regular order, or I thought it was an acquisition offer?
It was an acquisition offer. It was an acquisition offer, new customer acquisition offer, and then not consistent, like on every grocery order. And then you had to maintain a certain kind of delivery order. I think it was at one point it was like 80, and then we increased it. You had to spend $100. So the AOV, to make it worthwhile, we had to keep increasing that grocery order to make it make sense from like a margin standpoint.
So from my previous experience running similar marketing campaigns, we have a very, very prevalent behavior called one and dones. It's basically those people who took advantage of the introductory offer and never come back. I'm curious, like how severe is it in your experience for grocery delivery?
I think loyalty is tough in grocery delivery too, for that same reason. Like, you think people shop like coupons, whatever, even myself, like I've tried every delivery service because they offer, a little bit less now, but all the direct mails, like I'll receive them all on the same day. HelloFresh, Hungry Root, everyone has the same offer. There's not much differentiation. So there's not much loyalty there unless, how do you win? For me, what I found really interesting in my time at Jupiter, which is a sort of influencer-based recipe grocery shopping platform, is there is loyalty to influencers though. So we follow to certain influencers, like the influencers that we were working with were very large, well-known. They're on TV, they have cookbooks. So you own their cookbook at home. You regularly follow their content and their recipes. And so while you might not have loyalty to the grocery delivery company, you kind of like, I consistently make half-baked harvest recipes. And she's has over, 20 million, or like very massive following. And I did see like in that area, there's a little bit more loyalty. So I may switch groceries, or whoever's more convenient, or has the best deal, or has whatever most people value when it comes to convenience and price. But I did see some kind of influence with those recipe influencers, but not all of them. Like I was saying, there's certain very big ones that like everyone kind of heard of, or so I think that was interesting.
So in those cases, does influencer marketing work well for Good Eggs? And then how much of a pricing power, like if the influencers control like all the audiences, I presume it's going to be very expensive to run with them. I'm curious, how did that work out?
Influencers didn't work great for Good Eggs, but because of how hyper local and the geo-targeting, that made it really difficult to run like successful influencer campaigns in that space. But another kind of type of influencer that I've seen a lot of success, or specific like grocery platforms, like even Walmart, they're specifically Walmart grocery influencers. So they're like walking into a Walmart and showing groceries and what's on sale right now this week, and like that kind of like very specific. Those also I've like seen success with that type of, but with Good Eggs, it was just a challenge to run, just given that hyper like zip code geo targeting.
It sounds like just expensive all around. Influencer is expensive, hyper geo targeting is expensive. Actually, do you think direct mail in relative terms is expensive in this case then, like considering the postages and the logistics required to run a direct mail campaign to people's physical inbox?
It definitely is. And like there's all that competition, like I was saying, but it probably, will work better in a national, you can achieve better results on national scale than in this market where it's hyper local. It's just, I think.
Is it because of the overhead?
The overhead, and then just like how limited your geo is. There's just not that much inventory or availability. And then at a certain point, it's diminishing returns. So.
But you said like competitiveness, but aren't you guys brand differentiated in terms of more on the higher end and the affluence part of the consumer spectrum? Does that help in terms of like contrasting yourself from the other competitors, the Walmart groceries of the world?
Definitely does from those, but then within that, there's still, there's Whole Foods, and especially in San Francisco, there was like a lot of local grocers you could also shop from that carry the same premium, and you could just go and walk on your way home from work. You can go purchase it. So I think, but in that specific category, there wasn't as many online premium grocers.
Yeah, I actually think one of the things very interesting when you talk about scaling is Postcards actually has a lot of overhead. To your point, once you do the design, you want to be able to send out like millions, and now it's not millions. So that's why each card becomes more expensive. So
Definitely.
I'm curious, like, how does that work when you decide to expand to a new city? Because you mentioned San Francisco a lot, but I know you like open up in new cities. Like, what are your strategies when you run marketing? Say, hey, now we are available in, say, Portland.
Yeah, the only city that I was there for the expansion, because we talked about the logistics and the warehouse and the challenges of that. Scaling this model was tough because you're talking about like everything's sourced locally. How many parts of the country can you source your full grocery order locally? There's not many places in the country that you can do that. In this case, we expanded to LA, and even sort of seeding that market, we did a lot of kind of painted door tests where we ran wait list campaigns to see what sort of demand there was. And we saw quite a bit of demand in LA, similar sort of value props, we're still like that small addressable audience of high household income who care about values-based grocery shopping and local organic, etc. But prior to when I joined Good Eggs, they did scale to New Orleans and I think a couple other cities on the East Coast. And I don't know how long they were in market, but it wasn't very long and they had to shut down in those markets. And I wasn't there during that time, but hypothesis is that, all the things that we just talked about, the logistics, the customer audience wasn't there who cared about those same value props, all of that. So really it just like became, and I think still today is a California-based hyper local grocery delivery company. So it's kind of unique. I'd be curious. I think they also opened in Brooklyn or somewhere in New York at that time. I'd be curious what other, like I was saying, there's not that many markets that model in the US could work, both from logisticals and value-based reasons.
And average income, I suppose.
Exactly.
Just to ground the context a little bit, this is a few years ago, and then like how much of the COVID and then the logistics challenges or the shelter in place have played a role, and then if we can guide us through that sort of logistical journey, or how much of that will be different had that not happened.
That was a super interesting time to join and be in grocery delivery. So I joined about 6 months before COVID, still saw kind of like incredible growth leading up to that because we're just sort of launching marketing and campaigns. And then COVID, everybody's home, everybody's scared to go outside. Everybody's ordering groceries online, and we just saw insane growth, but also inventory challenges. Like I mentioned earlier, like we couldn't even keep up with the demand as many, we would like sell out of delivery spots, not enough drivers, just many challenges across the board, including with the producers and local restaurants, local stores, having trouble staffing and keeping inventory. So it was definitely very unique and challenging time. I remember something specifically, which was not great for PR. People say any PR is good PR, but we had this issue around Thanksgiving. So Good Eggs had always saw really strong demand. We had these amazing kind of meal kits for Thanksgiving, and people loved them. And they ordered a ton of them. You kind of pre-order. We run the whole pre-order campaign, and people didn't get their orders on Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Before Thanksgiving, a lot of people. It was not good. It was sad. But it was
this
a tough.
2021.
I think it was 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, so peak COVID, partially people understood and partially people,
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah,
people are mad. They're like,
hard.
what do I do now? No restaurants are open. What am I going to eat on Thanksgiving? I have tons of guests coming over and I have nothing to feed them. It was not a great, I was going to say a PR nightmare, but I don't know if you want to keep that in there or not.
But still, it worked out. I mean, I would personally be more understanding, because at that time, even like I remember during the peak of COVID, you need to like log on to different apps like 8 o'clock in the morning just to sort of fight to sort of get your next batch of whatever things that they're available on sale.
Yeah, like toilet papers.
So-
You
I was
couldn't
just going
get
to say
toilet
that. I'm
papers.
like, literally, I was like hoarding toilet paper at this time. So I think most people were understanding, but I think, yeah, there's just obviously in any industry, there's always customers who will be unhappy. So you can't please.
I'm just searching online to sort of find out some references at that time. Like GoodX, you guys raised another $100 million February of 2021, so it must be doing well, and also convince the investors that it's a worthy investment. How is that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were riding the wave prior to COVID, during COVID. That time period's a little bit post COVID, and I think it took people, I saw this in other industries and just in the markets, it took people like another whole year, even after we said that COVID was over, to fully return to sort of normal behavior. But we did then see like a significant dip once people returned to normal behavior in revenue, in, marketing results. We do a lot of like interesting analysis actually to sort of identify like what's going on. Is we looked at, again, credit card data, and we sort of saw that restaurant spending was increasing as people, because think about it, we were all like locked in our homes, we couldn't go out to eat, and then all of a sudden like restaurant spend went up significantly, and as a result, grocery, because we're all tired of eating at home, we've been cooking all day every day, like by ourselves. So I think that was actually super interesting, but also super challenging to maintain growth rates when you are exiting like that sort of unique COVID period. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm also curious, given, like you say, the inventory was a challenge during COVID, and then people's behavior also changed so rapidly. So how does your framework or like budget, almost like a philosophy, to maintain all these external events that affect the entire market, not only you?
That was very challenging, both from like inventory managers, buyers. It's like I was saying earlier, you run campaigns, you like are trying to hit certain growth metrics, you're running a special campaign with a local producer, and then you're like told that you have X amount of inventory. And so you're able to think you can run your ads for a while, but then all of a sudden you run out and you have to sort of shut down the ads and the marketing. And sort of like, it was a tough game of like forecast and planning and demand planning during such a unique period as well. And with this hyper local kind of challenge in itself, right? Because small local businesses aren't like the most sophisticated either in their inventory planning. And like they run into a lot of challenges that larger players don't, just, staffing and all kinds of things that can impact local businesses versus Whole Foods or, yeah.
Are there anything that the business is interested in helping you to grow? Like any of the marketing campaigns that they feel like you guys are a separate channel that they can invest in and help you? Like in the delivery space, like I know, for example, in actual grocers, you have a lot of the promotions are actually sponsored by the CPG partners.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes, we did a lot of successful campaigns where we kind of shared budget and both promoted. For example, I think we did something with Spindrift or some other kind of local producers and brands, because you kind of leverage both their brand and our brand, and saw pretty good success with that, but definitely requires a lot of coordination and stuff in terms of budgets and who's going to run the campaigns, from which ad account are you going to, all of that kind of thing. So I think that was interesting. In most cases, we ran the campaign just given we were still a very small kind of lean team, but we had more experience in kind of performance marketing than some of those kind of local producers.
Yeah, I think the co-branding is definitely very interesting. You mentioned sometimes you share the budget and sometimes they even spend more. Like I think Whole Foods for a while was running a lot of marketing campaigns for Instacart to get customers. So I'm curious, like, how do you manage all this external funding I guess,
Yes.
the ROI and like scaling this up.
It was tough to scale. They often didn't have very big budgets either, right? They're like, but I think just kind of we're the ones owning the ad management. So we're the ones tracking. There's a lot of like, I mean, they're small businesses and Good Eggs wasn't very large either. So we just kind of like managed it amongst our teams in a very ad hoc, like spreadsheet kind of way, and then just reported back on the results to the producer. And then, we're like, it's performed really well. So it's sort of interesting in terms of not only, typically when you're asking for investment, you're asking like internally, but here you're also kind of like proving the success to external partners and vendors. And then they need to go get buy-in from, their boss who may or may not know marketing. So kind of like we'd have to get on and like explain it to them. It's like a whole kind of interesting collaborations, but they performed in most cases like they were not spending that much money, and we could show quickly with local, you can show pretty significantly that how much sales you did, and they performed well. You get 2 brands for 1. So
that is awesome. Yeah. So I think Jun, Sipra shared a lot of very unique insights into specifically like a geo-limited business. Is there like, if there's one advice you want to give to someone who's entering this industry, like how do they start, or like what's you think is the most important given all these challenges and uniqueness in this type of
Sipra, what's your main words of wisdom after you survived all
I don't
these?
know. Hyperlocal is tough. I think you really have to know what you're doing, and you have to really test and get really into the data and be able to tell your stories. I also think, you really need to know like that local customer. What do they care about? How do you message to them? Where can you reach them? I think it's a unique space, but it's fun with the marketing in a way too. Even so, there's those challenges, right? But also it's fun to run a campaign or run it out of home like bus stop that specifically speaks to that neighborhood. Or even like I was saying, you could literally call out, why would you buy from there when you can get your groceries from 5 miles away? Or like some, like there's unique opportunity there to get creative. And yeah, I think that'd be my advice.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also really I think bus stop ads are underrated.
I agree. I love bus stop ads. I definitely will stop, and I've taken pictures about really good bus stop ads because exactly what I was saying, they can specifically speak to where you are right then, even mention the street that you're on, or just hyper local. I think it's cool and really targeted. So
yeah, and what do we do when we're waiting for the bus anyway?
Exactly.
You might also do some grocery shopping.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Jun, do you have anything you want to add on to this hyper local growth?
No, I think the main stupid takeaway that I have in my head is California just needs to be run as a whole separate thing whenever you're doing geo-targeting. I think there's just so many uniquenesses of California that probably is underrated there as well.
Totally. And even in general, in marketing to California as its own, we could do a whole episode on that.
Absolutely, its own privacy act,
exactly,
its own policies of everything. Also, it's now the biggest economy. One of the biggest is at number 4. It's bigger than Japan.
Yes,
as a whole.
It's its own country. It's like you're expanding to a new market. So yeah.
Hyper local in that way in itself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's super awesome. Thank you so much, Sipra, to be on this episode. We learned a lot.
Yeah, me too. It's so fun to chat with you guys.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you. And then next time we'll talk about California marketing as a whole separate episode, and we'll invite you back.
Sounds
amazing.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. And then we'll see you in the next episode.